This idea of comparing the nightmare of Vietnam to that of Afghanistan came from Jimmy Carter's defense advisor, Zbigniew Brzezinski, known as a fierce anti-communist.
I remember the day the Soviets walked into Kabul and occupied Afghanistan. I gave the president a memo which had the sentence in it, "We now have the opportunity to give the Soviet Union its Vietnam." And we acted accordingly for the first time in the history of the entire Cold War.
Brzezinski came in and completely muddled that policy because he was so anti-Soviet with his own East European background.
So the origins of that were in January of 1980. Then Brzezinski goes out and talks to Mohammad Zia-ul-Haq, the president of Pakistan, and he goes up to Michny Point, looking into Afghanistan there from the Khyber Pass. And he picked up that Kalashnikov and sort of pointed into Afghanistan. And at that moment, the American commitment was vividly demonstrated.
You know, that land over there is yours. You'll go back to it one day, because your fight will prevail, and you'll have your homes and your mosques back again, because your cause is right, and God is on your side.
During the beginning stages of the Soviet-Afghan War in 1979, the global intelligence services around began making financial assistance to many of the burgeoning warlords who had the largest and most influential clans in Afghanistan and its neighboring country in Pakistan. Warlords like Gulbuddin Hekmatyar was known to just about every single agency around the world, including the CIA, the British MI6, the Israeli Massoud, and the Maktab. His group, the Hizb-e-Islami, was the most financed out of all the warlords. He was also the most ruthless, known to walk in southern districts of Afghanistan, throwing acid at women's faces for not wearing the burqa. Hekmatyar was also known to cause mayhem with his own adversaries even during the war. His constant scheming against all of the Mujahideen factors led Pakistan general and leader Mohammad Zia-ul-Haq to warn Hekmatyar that it was Pakistan that made him an Afghan leader, and that Pakistan could and would destroy him if he resisted operational control by the ISI. In 1988, Pakistan ISI General Hamid Gul constituted an operation to use the Mujahideen forces to storm Jalalabad from the Afghan army and implement Northern Alliance leader Abdul Rasul Sayyaf as prime minister, with Hekmatyar as foreign minister. Gul made the mistake of using conventional warfare against his opponents, but underestimated them to the point of embarrassment. The Afghan army had soundly defeated Gul's advances. This battle proved that the Afghan army could fight without Soviet help and greatly increased the confidence of government supporters. This defeat would also cost the guerrilla armies led by Sayyaf and Hekmatyar, as many would oppose ranks and join the Afghan and Pakistan government entities. Hamid Gul was sacked by Pakistan Prime Minister Benazir Bhutto and replaced by Shamsur Rahman Kalu, who pursued a more classical policy of support to the rebels fighting in Afghanistan. Bhutto was now in the crosshairs of not only Gul, but those loyal to him in the ISI, as well as the guerrilla factions. The CIA began funneling millions of dollars to the Maktab al-Khidamat in Peshawar under the control of local Imam Abdul Azzam in 1988. Gulbuddin was being primarily funded and backed by the Pakistan ISI at this point, and would receive funding behind the backs of the ISI, as the Pakistan agency didn't want any funding from any agency that represented the West. Zia-ul-Haq began openly supporting local mujahideen from the madrasas, who began the defensive jihad Azzam had begun to teach as the motivation for the cause against the secular invaders from the Soviet Union. This ideology would begin to spread with rapid ascents in Southeast Asia and even towards Mecca. It would bring more attention not just from the Afghan mujahids, but also to the Saudi and Arabs as well. One of them was Osama bin Laden, who would think of Azzam as a father figure and spiritual mentor. With bin Laden came an Egyptian cleric from the Egyptian Islamic Jihad, a doctor, Ayman al-Zawahiri. With bin Laden and al-Zawahiri, the Maktab al-Khidamat would now have the financial and physical resources worldwide needed to defend Afghanistan, while the intelligence services funding the war through the back door of the recruitment center in Peshawar. While the war waged, Pakistan's own madrasas would opine the religious war, not just in Afghanistan, but also inside the United States. The two main recruitment centers located in New York City and Arizona would have visitors from abroad, such as Abdul Rahman from the Gamma Islamiyah and Abdul Azzam, who gave fiery speeches in many U.S. cities, such as Detroit, Brooklyn, New York, New Jersey, and Kansas City. Speeches about jihad and the need to replace Western values. Meanwhile, the CIA watched from abroad, and the FBI was simply ill-equipped to understand, much less acknowledge the enemy from within. By 1987, Azzam began to propagate that in order to obtain victory against the Soviets, there needs to be an Islamic ummah of both the Sunni and Shia sects. Azzam had envisioned the war as the beginning of the end of the war between the two Islamic groups, but this did not sit well with the Sunni hardline clerics, such as Ayman al-Zawahiri, but it wasn't something he would end up completely disagreeing with either. By the time the recruitment office of the Maktab al-Khidamat was now jointly governed by Abdul Azzam, Osama bin Laden, and Ayman al-Zawahiri, the Soviet Union was in the initial stages of retreat, and their local guerrilla armies began to conduct operations on the weaker sects to fight for domination for the country itself. Author Peter Bergen, who understood the nature of the war, states that by the most conservative estimates, over $600 million in American aid through the Pakistan went to the Hizb-ut-Islami party. Hekmatyar's party had the dubious distinction of never winning a significant battle during the war, training a variety of militant Islamists from around the world and killing significant number of mujahideen from other parties while taking a virtually anti-Western line. In addition to hundreds of millions of dollars of American aid, Hekmatyar also received a lion's share of aid from the Saudis, who were sympathetic to Hekmatyar and the Afghanis. The rift between Pakistan and Afghanistan would continue into the Civil War, a war between two factions, the Northern Alliance led by Ahmad Shah Massoud and the Taliban led by Muhammad Mullah Omar. Omar began the Taliban when only 50 armed men from madrasas within the Afghan refugee camps, supported by the Taliban and the Pakistan ISI. The idea was to bring Afghanistan to Islamic rule, a country governed by Sharia law, met by the dictations of Muhammad in the Quran, through the interpretation of Abdullah Azzam, Ayman al-Zawahiri, and the Taliban. The movement gained momentum through the year 1993 and quickly gathered recruits from the Islamic schools. By the end of 1994, 12,000 Taliban fighters would begin fighting against the Northern Alliance. It seemed the end of the secular government of Afghanistan was being replaced by the religious entity known as the Taliban, while the United States, who left the country behind, was watching from afar as tens of thousands were piling up dead from the internal struggle for Afghanistan raged within. The blood flowed quite deeply. This would later give ramifications from the United States in the years to come, from groups like al-Qaeda, who were supported by Osama bin Laden and Ayman al-Zawahiri, who then concentrated the next war was against the United States.